Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Milligan, and we are proudly sponsored by SPI Logistics. And we've got Tyler Hughes, who is the CTO and co-founder of Vizion. We're going to be talking about the data integrity standard on predictive intelligence and ocean visibility. And the reason that we want to dive into this is how standardized data and real-time APIs are finally solving the ocean visibility gap. We're going to discuss the 2026 outlook on global container trade, the role of predictive ETAs in avoiding detention and demurrage, and why clean data is the only way to build a resistant supply chain. And so you mentioned you guys are famous for being the X-ray for ocean containers. For folks who don't understand what Vizion is, which I think you can kind of gather by the name, give us a sort of macro, high-level, eagle-eye view of what Vizion provides.
Sure. So Vizion, we started out purely focused on gathering and aggregating and cleaning up visibility data across the entirety of a container lifecycle. I think as we have grown, we've become much more of the kind of data integrity layer across all of global trade, especially when it pertains to container moves. So I think for us, we are focused on looking at the moves of containers, providing that data, cleaning that data up, and making it available via API or our own platforms, wherever you need it, however you need to use it, for whatever size business you are, right? So really looking toward democratizing data, but doing that in a way that makes it still easy to use and allows you to go from being just purely reactive in your shipments to being proactive and really starting to build that level of intelligence on top of your own shipments as well as the market at large. So, we started out with just visibility data for our own customers. Now we have visibility data as well as global trade information across the last 10 years that we're able to turn into strategic solutions as well. So, we've got real-time visibility, and then we've got strategic planning, performance, any kind of lane volatility, things like that we can surface and show, as well as like supplier information, things like that. So we can really dig into, not only where are the containers at, where are they going, where have they been, but also what's in those containers and who's responsible for moving them.
So that's it. You mentioned, some of the data integrity. And so with the data integrity, I'm always curious because I hear a lot of we need to clean the data, we need to structure the data. How do you actually do that?
A lot of hard work, a lot of smart people. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I think the first and foremost, the biggest thing you have to focus on is just the overall collection, right? Without having a ton of data, you don't have a lot of input to understand how you start to go about the standardization process. And that could be anything from the milestones that are occurring. So think about all the different carriers that are moving goods or moving containers. They're all reporting roughly the same information, but they love to report it just slightly differently than each other, right? So you have to go about building an understanding on a carrier by carrier basis or on a data provider, but a data source level as well. So think about connecting to terminals, to rails, to rail lines, and anything in between. All of them are going to be describing events that are occurring, but they're all going to be doing that in slightly different ways. So everybody's got their own schema per se, but it's a matter of understanding what those schemas are, and you can only do that with a massive amount of data to start with. From there, it's distilling that down. It's, like I said, using a lot of smart people, machine learning to some degree.
Is it like a if this, then that kind of?
It's initially how it started, but as we've gotten further along, I think we've built a much more mature pipeline around that. So, not only is it still that, yes, of course, you can't escape it. We do have additional kind of data modeling and machine learning processes that we can run all of that massive amount of data through and actually get to those standardizations. But like I said, that's just for descriptions themselves. You've still got timestamps on the milestones that are occurring. You've got other pieces of information, so location data. There's UN low codes, for example. A lot of those things may or may not be included in the milestones that you see. It's up to us to kind of take whatever little tidbits of information that come out of that regarding a location and actually turn that into something that's structured and usable. So UN low codes, geolocation coordinates, the actual full object of the, describing where the location is instead of say like just Freeport or Hong Kong, right? We can actually turn that into more because it gets, Hong Kong's easy, but let's say you've got a Louisville or something like that, or really anything that's got more than one place that's named the same thing. You actually start to have to do a lot of reconciliation to understand, do I have the right location, right?
Especially if they're global, because I had a gentleman on the show last year from Geo Postcodes, and he was talking about how they only do addresses, and then they sell that data set to different companies because you can't believe how many, just the language barriers and things like that, how different even just the name of a city or the spelling of a city is from place to place, language to language.
Yeah, we've experienced a lot of the same things. So much so that we've actually built our own technology. We have our own architecture that actually handles all of those geolocation lookups ourselves. And it's a lot like milestone standardization itself. There is a lot of if this then that. You have to do a lot of rules-based work. Just to handle those little nuances across different strings that come through, or those little differences in a letter or whatever in spelling.
Or if it's all caps, or if there's a dash, or...
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many times a carrier is going to report a location name that is just butchered, absolutely butchered from a spelling perspective, right? So it's up to us to kind of figure out what did they even mean to begin with, right? And then how do we turn that into a location object?
Now, one of usually the first day of Manifest, Vizion hosts all-day panels. I think it's called the Ion Sessions, and so it's at like 12 to 5 p.m. I believe is during the session times. And this year, I thought it was really interesting that you brought technically, I guess, a competitor up on stage for to do some of these different conversations. How do you kind of, balance, is it a rising tide lifts all sails kind of partnership?
Yeah, so it's Tive this year that we're co-hosting with, and really excited about it. I would never say, I think it's easy to look at Tive or companies like them and view them as a competitor to us, but I think in reality, Tive is actually, we work together. We've been working together for a number of years. We've been close with them for quite some time. But it goes back to your point. Yes, I think there is a rising tide lifts all boats. But one of the things that I've always kind of said around this space is there is no benefit in building in a silo, especially if you're trying to provide visibility at a full spectrum, right? So if you're looking to do end-to-end visibility and you're looking to have clean, verified data, you're not going to be able to do that by just building everything yourself. You need to be working with as many companies as you can. You need to be working with as many data sources as you can and filling in those gaps. So, with somebody like Tive, who, is largely operating with sensor data, we help them a lot with filling in their gaps where the sensors may not have information. We can fill those milestones in, we can fill those moves in the other locations. So things like AIS tracking, we can build onto that. We use that to build out predictive ETA, part of our predictive ETA process. And we can actually fill in the entire story for them, and then likewise them for us, right? So to your point, a rising tide absolutely lifts all boats, but I like I said, I don't think anyone will ever be successful if they try to go it alone the entire way, right?
Well, there is, so I moderated a panel 2 years ago at Manifest on the visibility topic. And one of the biggest, sort of visibility gaps was the missing trucking data, because a lot of drivers don't want to have tracking and they feel it's an invasive into their privacy. And so when you have 90% of carriers with 7 trucks or less, it creates a situation where you might not have that end-to-end visibility that the customers really desire. What's sort of the state of play today? Are you seeing more carriers get on the visibility train to help that process?
That's a really good question. I would say, in general, if I want to give a very broad answer or look at it from a very broad perspective, I would say no. It's not really changed all that much. Yes, of course, there is some modernization. Some people are, continuing to, improve their processes. They are getting on the bandwagon, and they are adding sensor data, or they're adding, better tracking. They've got, LDs in their trucks, even the smaller carriers. But you're always going to have those mom and pop providers that are, like you said, they've got a handful of trucks in operation, and they're not interested at all in trying to modernize or improve things, because it's just cost to them. They don't,
Time and money.
There's no difference to them whether they're using that or not. It doesn't really make a difference. They're going to get the business either way. So I think one of the things that we try to focus on heavily there is networking, right? And it's how we've gone about every, when we go to build a new data source or we go to, add new sources to our existing data sources. That's how we do it, right? We do a lot of networking. We pound a lot of pavement and we go and build relationships directly with those providers. I think for drayage, it's still one of the bigger black boxes to me, and I think to a lot of people today. Obviously, there are some companies that are providing that data, but even the largest ones are still providing, roughly single-digit percentages of the overall drayage market, right? So there's no one that is really able to give you a complete picture. And this goes back to your earlier point, right? Of like how to, working with different people, working with different companies to get that information together. You really have to think about how do you build out networks that can work for everyone, and then what are some of the incentives that you can actually provide to those smaller businesses to get on board, or at least give you some level of information that you can work with.
And I think the government is still trying to work on those different, pathways. And so whereas you can share your data anonymously and then get the benefits of seeing everybody else's data anonymously.
It was a big push last year, and toward the end of 2024 as well. Haven't really seen the fruits of that labor yet. I mean, I'm still hopeful and excited, but at the same time, I'll always be skeptical.
Yeah.
We've seen standards come and go. We've seen mandates come and go. And at the end of the day, I think we've found ourselves still left to kind of do it how we
Really, because that was going to be my next question, is there any kind of effort for standardizing data across different modes, different...
There always are, and there have been standardization layers, and there are standards out there. They're great. We do work with them. So things like the DCSA, the standard that they have for visibility as well as other logistics schemas, they're great. We've built in full compliance with those, but at the same time, the adoption level is minimal. Carriers are still not really working with that level of standardization themselves. So at the end of the day, we still find ourselves having to standardize the data and then standardize it again into a format. So if you want to use something like DCSA standards, we can provide that to you, but we still have to do all the mapping on the back end first, right? And that's fine. It's just kind of the way it is. And I think that's sort of the conclusion I've come to, right, is you don't need to worry about standardization, and the carriers don't need to do it either, because the API that we have will, right? We'll just go ahead and...
So you'll do it for them. You'll help them in that regard.
Yeah, and if there are any carriers out there that would like some assistance, we would be more than happy to help. We do work with a few already directly, but I would always be happy to add more to the list.
Now, well, speaking of carriers, because you guys just released a massive 2026 forecast on container trade, what were some of the most surprising trends that you saw come out of that report?
That's a really good question. I would say, in 2025, there was a really outsized focus on tariffs, and I think there was a lot of expectation to see a downward trend in exports and imports from China. Related to that, as well as other countries, but largely there. I think one of the things that we've definitely seen is that's continuing to grow. The shift is actually shifting more than we would have expected. And so you're seeing a lot more volume come out of China than I think anybody really would have planned for. But it's not necessarily due to U.S. imports anymore, right? One of the things that we're starting to see is our new trade agreements, right? New trade alliances that are starting to pop up. Let's take, for example, Canada and China coming to an agreement for importing Chinese EVs into the country, right? That is going to greatly increase the amount of volume that's coming out of China, but it's not really going to be a benefit to the U.S. in any kind of way, right? And I think you're going to continue to see that play out over and over again. You're also seeing other countries, other regions pull back on the amount of import or export that they're doing with the U.S. And that's something that I think maybe some people saw coming, toward the end of last year. But as we get into this year, that is a real thing. It is actually happening. And I mean, if I'm honest, I would have never expected to see Canada come to an agreement And like I said, other allied U.S. allied countries coming to trade agreements with China and with other countries and greatly increasing the amount of export that they can do, like I said, without any benefit to the U.S. directly. But there's only risk when that comes out of this now, right? Like I feel like you've got a bunch of Chinese EVs running across Canada, and everybody starts to love them. Americans are going to start to ask the question of, well, why can't we have those down here?
Exactly.
So I think it's something to look out for. I think the other thing that's been fairly notable is the increase in volume coming out of other Southeast Asian countries. So Vietnam, Philippines as well, pretty huge growth there and only continuing.
What about Mexico cross-border trade?
I'd say cross-border, it's probably about the same. I wouldn't call it a mass. I wouldn't point at really any major shifts there. Overall, I think there's maybe a bit more, but it really comes down to manufacturing, I think, more than anything else coming between the U.S. and Mexico. So how much are we actually manufacturing in Mexico? How much are we allowing to come back into the country? And with the pushes that we see right now to bring a lot of manufacturing into the U.S., especially from countries like Mexico, or liberating ourselves from manufacturing or dependence in Canada, we're bound to see less of it over time. It's just not really been something that's super notable as of yet.
I want to talk about this demurrage and detention nightmare because you guys say that you have 99% of global port coverage, but how does that translate into dollars actually saved?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you kind of a little anecdote. So let's say you're a small, medium-sized 3PL. You're moving about 5,000 containers a year. Let's say on average you're seeing about $300 or so in avoidable D&D on each of those containers. If even 8% or so of those containers were to incur those fees, you're looking at about $120K a year.
Oh, wow.
Right? If you can reduce or if you can improve your accuracy on ETAs and understanding when those are by 24 to 48 hours, you're greatly improving the margin that you can see there. And that's just a small forward, or that's a small 3PL, right? Let's extrapolate that, right? Some of our customers are incurring things somewhere on the order of $500 million to $1 billion a year in D&D costs, right? So you think about being able to have just that little bit of extra visibility, that little bit of extra, forward knowledge. You're looking at savings of up to $1 billion a year for some of the largest companies we work with.
Wow, that's incredible. Because I would hope that would lead to lower prices for a lot of different goods in the economy, considering transportation costs are about half of a product's cost. But we'll see.
I hate to get into that too much, but I feel like the days of seeing costs drop because logistics improve may or may not. They're likely over. Let's
like
be honest.
millennials waiting for
right?
the housing.
The money goes back
prices
it goes into another pocket.
Right. Yeah, very true.
But the savings are there. I guess the more people that know about it, the better.
Now, I want to talk about just from your perspective, scaling visibility. What does sort of the entry-level visibility process look like, and then how do you sort of kick it up a notch, throw gasoline on it?
Sure. So I think it's a lot like what we talked about earlier. The first steps for us is really are building out those connections to the different providers or the different sources of information that you can get a hold of. And I think there's, it goes back to the earlier point of there's plenty of data out there. It's how you utilize the data. It's how you clean that data. It's how you reconcile that data. That's really what ends up happening. So for us, a lot of the information starts at the source of the carrier, right? So we will oftentimes start with the ocean carrier more than anything else, and then from there we will build in those additional data sources based on what the carrier is saying and what vessel it's moving on, things like that. So we will kind of fan out, right? So we'll have carrier information that's coming through on the ocean side. We will then start to map that into our vessel tracking. So we will have all of the vessel moves themselves. We'll be able to monitor those in real time. We'll connect to the terminals that are, that the containers are actually bound for. We'll have that information, so they'll be able to report directly to us. We can then kind of smoosh all that together. And, it's not to say we have more, right? There's rail, there's truck.
Right.
We've got all that as well. But we go to each one of those sources and we have the raw data. We have all those different pieces of inputs. From there, it's about reconciliation because everybody's got their own version of the truth, right? So we have to look at, what are the facts? And one of the things that really comes in handy for us is understanding exactly where the vessels are versus what the carrier is saying or what the port might be saying or what the terminal might be saying. We can actually see the vessel coming in, right? We can see
Stop
the
lying.
speed. Yeah, we can do some triangulation there. So it allows us to, really get in deep, reconcile the information, deduplicate, standardize, like I said before, and turn that into a complete picture of visibility, right? So that's on the real-time side, right? That's looking at, how do you improve your operational capability? How do you improve your day-to-day planning? How do you improve your week-over-week planning, right? And then I think from that, we have all of that data and more that feeds into the other side of what we do, which is global trade intelligence, and that turns it into not just operational capability, but strategic capability as well.
Yeah, because you guys have a great podcast too called Trade View, or I guess it's a YouTube series, not necessarily podcast is kind of a catch-all term. Yeah. But you guys have a great insight on those, and I learned so much as someone, coming from like an asset-based 3PL, being able to watch that kind of coverage, that helps me kind of connect the dots a little bit more. I'm curious if you could wave sort of a visibility wand, what are you fixing first?
What am I fixing first? In visibility itself?
In visibility as a whole.
I would say if I could wave my magic wand, it's the black box that I was talking about earlier, right? I think improving visibility and building true visibility into the drayage markets would be one of the biggest things I would love to see. Like I said, I've kind of given up on wishing or hoping that carriers are going to, fall in line and come up with standards that they're actually all going to adhere to. We've solved that problem. It's fine. But one of the places where we still have to spend a lot of time, and the same thing is kind of true for terminals, but we've done a good job of getting those relationships built and having the network, a pretty large network of terminals across the U.S. and globally as well, to the point where it's less of an issue today. But I think drayage is still one of the places where I would love to see more openness. I would love to see more modernization. And, like I said, standardization I'm not worried about. It's just getting access to the information, right? That's probably the biggest thing. So drayage would be my top pick, honestly.
I think it's awesome. You make a great point because it could be a way to sell yourself as a drayage carrier, that you're adopting these technology trends and that you can help give those clients end-to-end visibility, which is what they want.
And I think for the larger one, that's true, and that is starting to happen. But it's all of those. It's such a fragmented market, right? It's such a fragmented space. I think being able to get your hands into and into the ear of every one of those small, like I said, kind of the mom and pop running 5 trucks, whatever, running 3 trucks. It's how do you make them care? Right. How do you get them to the point where they actually want to participate? And I think it really comes back to like what incentives can you draw? And for me, that's what I would love to come up with next, is building out a strong network for drayage providers to participate in. It allows them to, in my mind, it's how do you enable more business for even those smaller carriers, the smaller providers. So thinking about what does an onboarding network look like to get those people involved, to get them to come and play ball, to get them more business, but also to get us access to that information.
All right, Tyler, last couple questions here. Anything important that you think we should mention that we haven't already talked about?
Well, I think we talked a lot about visibility itself, and I think the real-time portion of that is our bread and butter, has been for many years. Over the last few, we've definitely transitioned that more into, like I said, global trade intelligence, so our Trade View platform. So I think one of the biggest things that I would just point at is, if you really want to have a full capability, if you want to be able to take full advantage of visibility data and trade information, you need to be using both, right? If you're moving any kind of containers, you need real-time visibility. You need to be able to be proactive about that from an operational standpoint. But at the same time, let's say you're a large retailer, you're a BCO, you're a 3PL, you're competing for business, or you're a carrier, any one of those, looking at the trade view side of what we offer today, I think is where you start to see a lot of strategic capability, where you can start to plan for your 30, 60, 90, even up to a year out, to understand things like lane volatility, carrier performance, planning overall, and that's sort of where we're headed over the rest of 2026 itself. Is how do we focus on providing not only more information around this, but how do we provide tools and services that help assist with both understanding and mapping out performance from an operational standpoint, but also for planning, and then likewise turning that into an actual planning solution. So you can start to make proactive decisions about who you're actually booking your freight with, what lanes do you care about, and how do those lanes shift over time? Because like I said, we're seeing a lot of redistribution of volume over new trade lanes where less important lanes are now becoming a lot more strategically important. I think it's worth it for everyone to be able to understand how those lanes are performing, what carriers are doing best there, and are they actually getting the best deals? Are they getting the best service out of the carriers they're using or the solutions that they're utilizing today?
It was a good mic drop moment. Tyler, thank you so much.
Thank
Where
you,
can folks follow you and follow Vizion and all that good stuff?
Look us up on LinkedIn. Website is visionapi.com, but Vizion there. On LinkedIn, myself, you can find me around the internet, full of ship. So that's
nice.
We have our other podcast is called the Full of Ship.
Oh, nice.
Podcast.
Very nice.
So take a look, find us around, but at the same time, just come find us on the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thanks, Blythe.